Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Just let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to this slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools that I use, and justify my time on it, thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. If you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night, and you would like to help keep it going out to thousands of insomniacs, just like you, and you have the means to help me out, to keep it going, please consider supporting it on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that not only helps me keep the lights on, but also can get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. So go along there, take a look, and sign up if you're willing, and if you have the means. In the last few weeks, since I got sick actually, I've had a few folks signing up to the Sleepy Time Tales family, and these shout-outs are overdue. Apologies. Thanks very much to Tino, Amita, Demelza, and Jen, all for signing up in the last, most of them in the last couple of weeks, but Tino, I've owed you a shout-out for nearly 2 months. Apologies for that. Thank you very much to all of you for signing up. I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful. And I hope you enjoy the early releases and bonus episodes that you're receiving. Thank you so much. Of course, if monthly seems a big ask, you can make once-off tips through the tip jar on the website. I do also want to emphasize, though, if you don't have the means, please don't feel guilty. Times are tough for everyone, and I'm not here to make things worse. So don't feel bad if you can't contribute financially. But if you really want to help out in other ways, you can also just spread the word. Whether in person or on social media, if you think people will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. And that's enough. And that's enough of that. Let's get on with the relaxing stuff. Thank you for your time. We're back into spooky season, so we're back into the Book of Hallowe'en by Ruth, Edna, Kelley. And we pick up at chapter 11, in Brittany and France. The Celts had been taught by their priests that the soul is immortal. When the body died, the spirit passed instantly into another existence, in a country close at hand. Remember that the other world of the British Isles, peopled by the banished Tuatha, and all superhuman beings, was either in caves in the earth, as an island, or in an island like the English Avalon. By giving a mortal one of their magic apples to eat, fairies could entice him whither they would, and last away into their country. In the Irish story of Nero, the corpse of the criminal is the cause of Nero's being lured into the cave. So the dead have the same power as fairies and live in the same place. On May Eve and November Eve, the dead and the fairies hold their revels together and make excursions together. If a young person died, he was said to be called away by the fairies. The Tuatha may not have been a race of gods, but merely the early Celts, who grew to godlike proportions as the years raised a mound of lore and legends for the pedestal. so they might really be only the dead, and not of superhuman nature. In the 4th century AD, the men of England were hard pressed by the Picts and Scots from the northern border, and were helped in their need by the Teutons. When this tribe saw the fair country of the Britons, they decided to hold it for themselves. After they had driven out the northern tribes in the 5th century, when King Arthur was reigning in Cornwall, they drove out those whose cause they had fought. So the Britons were scattered to the mountains of Wales, to Cornwall, and crossed the Channel to Armorica, a part of France, which they named Brittany after their homeland. In Lower Brittany, out of the zone of French influence, a language something like Welsh or Old British is still spoken, and many of the Celtic beliefs were retained more untouched than in Britain, not clear of paganism until the 17th century. Here especially did Christianity have to adapt the old beliefs to her own ends. Gaul, as we have seen from Caesar's account, had been one of the chief seats of Druidical belief. The religious centre was Carnutes, now Chartrain. The rites of sacrifice survived in the same forms as in the British Isles. In the fields of Dos-Ivray, fires were built of stubble, ferns, leaves, and thorns, and the people danced about them and burned nuts in them. On St. John's Day, animals were burned in the fires to secure the cattle from disease. This was continued down into the 17th century. The pagan belief that lasted the longest in Brittany, and is by no means dead yet, was the cult of the dead. Caesar said that the Celts of Gaul traced their ancestry from the god of death, whom he called the Spater. Now figures of Lanku, a skeleton armed with a spear, can be seen in most villages of Brittany. This mindfulness of death was strengthened by the sight of the prehistoric cairns of stones on hilltops, the ancient altars of the Druids, and dolmens, formed of one flat rock, resting like a roof on two others, set up on end with a space between them. Ancient tombs, and by the Bretons being cut off from the rest of France by the nature of the country, and shut in among the uplands, black and misty in November, and blown over by the chill Atlantic winds. Under a seeming dull indifference and melancholy, the Bretons conceal a lively imagination, and no place has a greater wealth of legendary literature. What fairies, dwarfs, pixies, and the like are to the Celts of other places, the spirits of the dead are to the Celts of Brittany. They possess the earth on Christmas, St. John's Day, and All Saints. In Finisterre, that western point of France, there is a saying that on the eve of All Souls, there are more dead in every house than sands on the shore. The dead have the power to charm mortals and take them away, and to foretell the future. They must not be spoken of directly any more than the fairies of the Scottish border, or met with, for fear of evil results. By the Bretons of the 6th century, the nearby island of Britain, which they could just see on clear days, was called the Other World. A historian, Procopius, tells that the people nearest Britain were exempted from paying tribute to the Franks, because they were subject to nightly summons to ferry the souls of the dead across in their boats, and to deliver them into the hands of the Keeper of Souls. Further inland, a black bog seemed to be the entrance to an other world underground. One location which combined the ideas of an island and a cave was a city buried in the sea. The people imagined they could hear the bells of Keris ringing and joyous music sounding. For though this was a city of the dead, it resembled the fairy palaces of Ireland, and was ruled by King Grallon and his fair daughter Dahut, who would lure mortals away by her beauty and enchantments. The approach of winter is believed to drive, like the flocks, the souls of the dead from their cold, cheerless graves to the food and warmth of home. This is why November Eve, the night before the first day of winter, was made sacred to them. When comes the harvest of the year, before the scythe the wheat will fall. The harvest time reminded the Bretons of garnering that reaper Death. On November Eve, milk is poured on graves, feasts and candles set out on the tables, and fires lighted on the hearths to welcome the spirits of departed kinsfolk and friends. In France, from the 12th to the 14th century, stone buildings like lighthouses were erected in cemeteries. They were 20 or 30 feet high, with lanterns on top. On Hallowe'en, they were kept burning to safeguard the people from the fear of night-wandering spirits and the dead, so they were called the Lanterne de Mort. The cemetery is the social center of the Breton village, is at once meeting place, playground, park, and church. The tombs that outline the hills make the place seem one vast cemetery. On All Souls' Eve in the mid-19th century, the procession of tombs was held. All formed a line and walked about the cemetery, calling the names of those who were dead as they approached their resting places. The record was carefully remembered so that not one should seem to be forgotten. We live by our dead, say the Bretons. First on the eve of All Souls comes the religious service, Black Vespers. The blessedness of death is praised, the sorrows and shortness of life dwelt upon. After a common prayer, all go out to the cemetery to pray separately, each by the graves of his kin, or to the place of bones, where the remains of these long dead are thrown all together in one tomb. They can be seen behind gratings, by the people as they pass, and the rows of skulls at the sides of the entrance can be touched. In these tombs are Latin inscriptions meaning, "Remember, thou must die. Today to me, and tomorrow to thee," and others reminding the reader of his coming death. From the cemetery, the people go to a house or an inn, which is the gathering place for the night, singing or talking loudly on the road, to warn the dead who are hastening home, lest they may meet. Reunions of families take place on this night, and in the spirit of the Roman Feast of the Dead, the Feralia, of which Ovid wrote, "After the visit to the tombs and to the ancestors who are no longer with us, it is pleasant to turn towards the living, after the loss of so many. It is pleasant to behold those who remain of our blood, and to reckon up the generations of our descendants." A toast is drunk to the memory of the departed. The men sit about the fireplace smoking or weaving baskets, the women apart, knitting or spinning by the light of the fire and one candle. The children play with their gifts of apples and nuts. As the hour grows later and mysterious noises begin to be heard about the house, and a curtain sways in a draught, the thoughts of the company already centered upon the dead find expression in words, and each has a tale to tell of an adventure with some friend or enemy who has died. The dead are thought to take up existence where they left it off, working at the same trades, remembering their old debts, likes and dislikes, even wearing the same clothes they wore in life. Most of them stay not in some distant, definite other world, but frequent the scenes of their former life. They never trespass upon daylight, and it is dangerous to meet them at night, because they are very ready to punish any slight to their memory, such as selling their possessions or forgetting the hospitality due them, Lanku will come to get a supply of shavings if the coffins are not lined with them, to make a softer resting place for the dead bodies. The lively Celtic imagination turns the merest coincidence into an encounter with a spirit, and the poetic temperament of the narrators clothes the stories with vividness and mystery. They tell how the presence of a ghost made the midsummer air so cold that even wood did not burn, and of groans and footsteps underground as long as the ghost is displeased with what his relatives are doing. Just before midnight, a bellman goes about the streets to give warning of the hour when the spirits will arrive. They will sit where we sat and will talk of us as we talk of them. In the grey of the morning only will they go away. The supper for the souls is then set out. The poor who live in the mountains have only black corn, milk and smoked bacon to offer, but it is given freely. Those who can afford it spread on a white cloth dishes of clotted milk, hot pancakes and mugs of cider. After all have retired to lie with both eyes shut tight, lest they see one of the guests, death singers make their rounds, chanting under the windows, "You're comfortably lying in your bed, but with the poor dead it is otherwise. You're stretched softly in your bed, while the poor souls are wandering abroad. A white sheet and 5 planks, a bundle of straw beneath the head, 5 feet of earth above, are all the worldly goods we own." The tears of their deserted friends disturb the comfort of the dead, and sometimes they appear to tell those in sorrow that their shrouds are always wet from the tears shed on their graves. Wakened by the dirge of the death singers, the people arise and pray for the souls of the departed. Divination has little part in the annals of the evening, but one in Finisterre is recorded. 25 new needles are laid in a dish and named, and water is poured upon them. Those who cross are enemies. In France is held a typical continental celebration of All Saints and All Souls. On October 31st, the children go asking for flowers to decorate the graves and to adorn the church. At night, bells ring to usher in All Saints. On the day itself, the churches are decorated gaily with flowers, candles, and banners, and a special service is held. On the second day of November, the light and color give way to black drapings, funeral songs, and prayers. Chapter 12. The Teutonic Religion. Witches. The Teutons, that race of northern peoples called by the Romans barbarians, comprised the Goths and Vandals who lived in Scandinavia, and the Germans who dwelt north of Italy and east of Gaul. The nature of the northern country was such that the people could not get a living by peaceful agriculture. So it was natural that in the intervals of cattle tending they should explore the seas all about, and ravage neighboring lands. The Romans and the Gauls experienced this in the centuries just before and after Christ, and England from the 8th to the 10th centuries. Such a life made the Norsemen adventurous, hardy, warlike, independent, and quick of action, while the Celts were by nature more slothful and fond of peaceful social gatherings, though of quicker intellect and wit. Like the Greeks and Romans, the Teutons had 12 gods and goddesses, among whom were Odin or Wotan, the king, and his wife Freya, queen of beauty and love. Idun guarded the apples of immortality, which the gods ate to keep them eternally young. The chief difference in Teutonic mythology was the presence of an eagle god, Loki. Like Vulcan, Loki was a god of fire. Like him, Loki was lame because he had been cast out of heaven. Loki was always plotting against the other gods, and as Lucifer, after being banished from heaven by God, plotted against him and his people, and became Satan, the enemy. Him the almighty power hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion down to bottomless perdition, and there to dwell, in adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent arms. It was this god of evil in Teutonic myth who was responsible for the death of the bright, beautiful sun god Balder. Mistletoe was the only thing in the world which had not sworn not to harm Balder. Loki knew this and gave a twig of mistletoe to Balder's blind brother Hoder, and Hoder cast it at Balder, and unwitting slew him. Vali, a younger brother of Balder, avenged him by killing Hoder. Hoder is darkness and Balder light. They are brothers. The light falls victim to a blind darkness, who reigns until a younger brother, the sun of the next day, rises to slay him in turn. Below these gods all nature was peopled with divinities. There were elves of two kinds, black elves called trolls, who were frost spirits and guarded treasure, seeds, in the ground, and white elves who lived in mid-heaven and danced on the earth in fairy rings, where a mortal entering died. Will-o'-the-wisps hovered over swamps to mislead travellers, and jack-o'-lanterns, the spirits of murders, walked the earth near the places of their crimes. The other worlds of the Teutons were Valhalla, the abode of the heroes whom death had found on the battlefield, and Nilfheim, the misty realm, secure from the cold outside, ruled over by Queen Hel. Valkyries, warlike women who rode through the air on swift horses, seized the heroes from the fields of slaughter, and took them to the halls of Valhalla, where they enjoyed daily combats, long feasts and drinking bouts, music and storytelling. The sacred tree of the Druids was the oak, that of the Teutonic priests the ash. The flat disk of the earth was believed to be supported by the ash tree Yggdrasil. An ash on earth standing named Yggdrasil, a stately tree sprinkled with water the purest. Thence come the dewdrops that fall in the dales, ever blooming it stands over the Urda fountain. Guarded by three fates, was, will, and shall be. The name of was means the past, of will the power, howbeit small, which men have over present circumstances, and shall be, the future of which man has no control. Third, the name of the latter, gives us the word weird, which means fate or fateful. The three weird sisters in Macbeth are seeresses. Besides the ash, other trees and shrubs were believed to have peculiar powers, which they have kept, with some changes of meaning, to this day. The elder, elves' grave, the hawthorn, and the juniper were sacred to supernatural powers. The priests of the Teutons sacrificed prisoners of war in consecrated groves to Tyr, god of the sword. From these sacrifices auspices were taken. A man's innocence or guilt was manifested by the gods to men through ordeals by fire, walking upon red-hot plowshares, holding a heated bar of iron, or thrusting the hands into red-hot gauntlets or into boiling water. If after a certain number of days no burns appeared, the person was declared innocent. If a suspected man thrown into the water floated, he was guilty. If he sank, he was acquitted. The rites of the Celts were done in secret, and it was forbidden that they be written down. Those of the Teutons were commemorated in Edda and saga, poetry and prose. In the far north, the shortness of summer and the length of winter so impressed the people that when they made a story about it, they told of a maiden, the spring, put to sleep and guarded along with a hoard of treasure by a ring of fire. One night only could break through the flames, awaken her and seize the treasure. He is the returning sun, and the treasure he gets possession of is the wealth of summer vegetation. So there is the story of Brynhild, pricked by the sleep thorn of her father, Wotan, and sleeping until Sigurd wakens her. They marry, but soon Sigurd has to give her up to Gunnar, the relentless winter, and Gunnar cannot rest until he has killed Sigurd and reigns undisturbed. Grim story of Rapunzel, the princess who was shut up by a winter witch, and of Briar Rose, pricked by a witch's spindle and sleeping inside a hedge which blooms with spring at the night's approach, mean likewise the struggle between summer and winter. The chief festivals of the Teutonic year were held at midsummer and midwinter. May Day, the very beginning of spring, was celebrated by May ridings, when winter and spring, personified by two warriors, engaged in a combat in which winter, the fur-clad king of ice and snow, was defeated. It was then that the sacred fire had been kindled, and the sacrificial feast held. Judgments were rendered then. The summer solstice was marked by bonfires, like those of the Celts on May Eve and Midsummer. They were kindled in an open place or on a hill, and the ceremonies held about them were similar to the Celtic. As late as the 18th century, these same customs were observed in Iceland. A maypole wreathed with magical herbs is erected as the center of the dance in Sweden, and in Norway a child-chosen May bride is followed by a procession as at a real wedding. This is a symbol of the wedding of sun and earth deities in the spring. The maypole, probably imported from Celtic countries, is used at midsummer because the spring does not begin in the north before June. Yuletide in December celebrated the sun's turning back and was marked by banquets and gaiety. A chief feature of all these feasts was the drinking of toasts to the gods with vows and prayers. In the 6th century, Christianity had supplanted Druidism in the British Isles. It was the 9th before Christianity made much progress in Scandinavia. After King Olaf had converted his nation, the toasts which had been drunk to the pagan gods were kept in honor of Christian saints. For instance, those to Freya were now drunk to the Virgin Mary or to St. Gertrude. The wetting of the sark sleeve, that custom of Scotland and Ireland, was in its earliest form a rite to Freya as the northern goddess of love. To secure her aid in a love affair, a maid should wash in a running stream a piece of fine linen. For Freya was fond of personal adornment, and would hang it before the fire to dry an hour before midnight. At 11:30 she must turn it, and at 12 her lover's apparition would appear to her, coming in at the half-open door. The wind howled through the leafless boughs, and there was every appearance of an early and severe winter, as indeed befell. Long before 11 o'clock all was hushed and quiet within the house, and indeed without, nothing was heard, except the cold wind which howled mournfully in gusts. The house was an old farmhouse, and sat in the large kitchen with its stone floor, awaiting the first stroke of the 11th hour. It struck at last, and then all pale and trembling we hung the garment before the fire, which we had piled up with wood, and set the door ajar, for that was an essential part. The door was lofty and opened upon the farmyard, through which there was a kind of thoroughfare, very seldom used, it is true, and at each end of it there was a gate, by which wayfarers occasionally passed to shorten the way. There we sat without speaking a word, shivering with cold and fear, listening to the clock which went slowly, and occasionally starting as the door creaked on its hinges, or a half-burnt billet fell upon the hearth. My sister was ghastly white as the garment which was drying before the fire, and now half an hour had elapsed and it was time to turn. This we did, I and my sister, without saying a word, and then we again sank on our chairs on either side of the fire. I was tired, and as the clock went tick-a-tick, I began to feel myself dozing. I did doze, I believe. All of a sudden I sprang up. The clock was striking 1, 2. But ere it could give the third chime, mercy upon us, we heard the gate slam to with a tremendous noise. Well, and what happened then? Happened? Before I could recover myself, my sister had sprung to the door and both locked and bolted it. The next moment she was in convulsions. I scarcely knew what happened, and yet it appeared to me for a moment that something pressed against the door with a low, moaning sound. Whether it was the wind or not, I can't say. I shall never forget that night. About 2 hours later, my father came home. He had been set upon by a highwayman whom he had beat off. Borrow, Lavengro. Freya and Odin especially had power over the souls of the dead. When Christianity turned the old gods into spirits of evil, these two were accused especially of possessing unlawful learning, as having knowledge of the hidden matters of death. This lawful wisdom is the first accusation that has always been brought against witches. A mirror is often used to contain it. Such are the crystals of the astrologers, and the looking glasses which on Hallowe'en materialize witches. From that time in the Middle Ages, when witches were first heard of, it was nearly always been women who were accused. Women, for the most part, were priests in the old days. It was a woman to whom Apollo at Delphi breathed his oracles. In all times it has been women who plucked herbs and concocted drinks of healing and refreshment. So it was very easy to imagine that they experimented with poisons and herbs of magic power, under the guidance of the now evil gods. If they were so directed, they must go on occasion to consult with the masters. The idea arose of a witch's Sabbath, when women were enabled by evil means to fly away and adore in secret the gods from whom the rest of the world had turned. There were such meeting places all over Europe. There had been places of sacrifice, of judgment, or of wells and springs considered holy under the old religion, and whither the gods had now been banished. The most famous was the Blocksberg in the Harz Mountains in Germany. Dame Bauba first to lead the crew, a tough old sow and mother thereon, then followed the witches, every one. Goethe, Faust. In Norway, the mountains above Bergen were a resort, and the Dovrefeld, once the home of the trolls. It's easy to slip in here, but outward the Dover King's gate opens not. Peer Gynt. In Italy, the witches met under a walnut tree near Benevento. In France, in Puy-de-Dôme. In Spain, near Seville. In these night ridings, Odin was the leader of a wild hunt. In stormy, blustering autumn weather, the wonted roar was up among the woods. Milton, Comus. Odin rode in pursuit of shadowy deer with the furious host behind him. A ghostly huntsman of a later age was Dietrich von Bem, doomed to hunt till the judgment day. Frau Venus in Wagner's Tannhauser held her revels in an underground palace in the Hosselberg in Thuringia, Germany. This was one of the seats of Holda, the goddess of spring. Venus herself is like the Christian conception of Freya and Hel. She gathers about her a throng of nymphs, sylphs, and those she has lured into the mountain by intoxicating music and promises. The enchanting sounds enticed only those in whose hearts wild, sensuous longings had already taken root. Of these, Tannhauser is one. He has stayed a year, but it seems to him only one day. Already he is tired of the rosy light and eternal music, and languor, and longs for the fresh green world of action he once knew. He fears that he has forfeited his soul's salvation by being there at all, but cries, "Salvation rests for me in Mary." Wagner, Tannhauser. At the holy name Venus and her revelers vanish, and Tannhauser finds himself in a meadow. Hears the tinkling herd bells and a shepherd's voice singing. Frau Holder, goddess of the spring, steps forth from the mountains old. She comes and all the brooklets sing and fled as winter's cold. Play, play, my pop, your lightest lay, for spring has come and merry May. From Tannhauser, praising the goddess in her blameless state. By the 15th century, Satan, taking the place of the gods, assumed control of the evil creatures. Now that witches were followers of the devil, they wrote their names in his book, and were carried away by him for the revels by night. A new witch was pricked with a needle to initiate her into his company. At the party, the devil was adored with worship due to God alone. Dancing, a device of the pagans, and hence considered wholly wicked, was indulged to unseemly lengths. In 1883 in Sweden, it was believed that dances were held about the sanctuaries of the ancient gods, and whoever stopped to watch were caught by the dancers and whirled away. If they profaned holy days by this dancing, they were doomed to keep it up for a year. At the witches' Sabbath, the devil himself sometimes appeared as a goat, and the witches were attended by cats, owls, bats, and cuckoos, because these creatures had once been sacred to Freya. At the feast horseflesh, once the food of the gods at banquets, was eaten. The broth for the feast was brewed in a kettle held over the fire by a tripod, like that which supported the seat of Apollo's priestess at Delphi. The kettle may be a reminder of the one Thor got, which gave to each guest whichever food he asked of it. Or it may be merely that is used in brewing the herb remedies which women made before they were thought to practice witchcraft. In the kettle were cooked mixtures which caused storms and shipwrecks, plagues and blights. No salt was eaten, for that was a wholesome substance. The witches of Germany did not have prophetic power. Those of Scandinavia, like the Norse fates, did have it. The troll wives of Scandinavia were like the witches of Germany. They were cannibals, especially relishing children, like the witch in Hansel and Gretel. From the 14th to the 18th century, all through Europe and the New World, people thought to be witches, and hence in the devil's service were persecuted. It was believed that they were able to take the form of beasts. A wolf or other animal is caught in a trap or shot, and disappears.
Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time.
Later, an old woman who lives alone in the woods is found suffering from a similar
to help you to get a restful night.
She is then declared to be a witch.
New episodes will be released every Sunday night.
There was once an old castle in the middle of a vast, thick wood,
but make sure to
and
follow
it lived an old woman quite alone, and she was a witch.
So you get your new episodes.
A day she made herself into a cat or screech owl.
Good night.
But regularly at night she became a human being again. Grimm, Jorinda and Jorangel. Hares found on May morning are witches and should be stoned, reads an old superstition. If you tease a cat on May Eve, it will turn into a witch and hunt you. And on that rather chilling note, I'm going to call it there for tonight. If you'd like to pick up where I'm leaving off, as always, you can carry on and find the book at Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes.